Hi there, I'm going to show you how to paint this Campfire acrylic painting on an 11 by 14 inch canvas with acrylic paints. So the first thing I'm going to do is lay out where my horizon line is, and I didn't use a ruler this time. I just estimated about a third of the way up the canvas, and instead of a straight line I'm going to draw kind of a curved line, and that's going to set the direction of the strokes that we're going to do in the sky, because the strokes are going sort of in a curved formation. So I'm loading my palette with phthalo blue, what's ever left of my phthalo blue, because it's a common color that I like to use. So we're going to need phthalo blue and titanium white for the sky, and we're also going to use a 3/4 inch flat brush. Okay, so go ahead and load your palette with both of those colors and get your 3/4 inch flat brush ready. Load your brush in the water, tap it dry, kind of brush it out so that it's not soaking wet. Load it in the phthalo blue, and I like to brush it out on my palette to get whatever water is left on the bristles, to get it generously mixed with the paint so that when I apply the color it's going to flow. And this is going to be a thin layer of color. Because of the little water that's on the bristles, it's creating a thin layer. And I mentioned that our strokes are going to go curved, and that's going to be the direction of the strokes in the entire sky. So what I'm doing is I'm starting at the top and I'm going to work my way down. We're only using the phthalo and the white for this, so our color is going to essentially be darker at the top, and it's going to become lighter. And it's not going to become lighter until we add the white to it. So I'm just going to apply this phthalo. I'm going to go about halfway down my sky with this phthalo blue. So continue to add your color, and it's okay if it's a little streaky because it's a thin layer, and this phthalo has it's a dark color, but it's also kind of a see-through color, so it's hard to get it to be nice and opaque. So just kind of apply the paint. Make sure that when you're doing the strokes, you're going all the way across and not stopping in the middle. You want to glide your brush all the way across. So if you see what I'm doing, I'm going all the way from the right and all the way to the left. And I'm just going to add another layer up here at the top so that it's nice and dark. And then of course smooth it out so that there's not very many harsh strokes still showing through, and I'm going to continue to brush it down. This is going to speed up here a bit. If you need to press pause, go ahead and do so, but I'm continuing to add this second layer, and then I'm also going to paint the sides. Okay, so before your blue dries, you can turn your canvas to the side and paint the sides of the canvas. And then what's important is what we're going to do next is we're going to blend the white with the blue. So we don't want this to dry. We don't want to take any breaks right now. We want to get our white. My blue is still pretty wet on the canvas, although it's starting to dry a little bit. I don't want to clean my brush off. I still have blue on my brush, but if there's too much blue on your brush, you might want to wipe it off with a paper towel and then load the white. When I load the white, it's going to already start turning into a lighter blue. And you can see what I'm doing here. I started under where I started under where I stopped the phthalo, and I'm brushing upwards. I'm still doing the curved stroke, again starting below that area and brushing up. And when you brush up into it, your white runs out, but it blends into the blue, so it looks like your blue is doing a gradient of dark to light. And that's what I want to keep doing until I reach that curved line that I drew at the very bottom of where the horizon line is. So essentially your blue should be lightest where that line is, and it gets darker as you work your way up. and then make sure you're stroking all the way across. You're not stopping in the middle. You're doing that curved stroke all the way across. And then, so that's it. We're not going to really do much more to this guy. It's a nice thin layer of a blue faded to a white. I did forget to do the sides in this step, so if you need to, go ahead and paint the sides of it, but I forgot to do that in this pre-recorded video. But what I'm doing here is actually just going to use up the leftover of whatever my phthalo blue is left on the palette, and I'm just going to make sure this top part is extra dark, because that just gives it a nice effect of the night sky where it's very dark at the top and then it gets lighter as it goes towards the horizon line. Okay, so now that we're done with the sky, we're going to set our 3/4 brush to the side, and we're going to grab a toothbrush, and I'm going to do splatters with this. So the way I'm going to load this toothbrush is, so the bristles are already wet on it, and I'm just taking my finger and applying the paint to the brush with my finger. You can just dip the brush in the paint if you want. Test it off on the side first to see what happens, because you don't want the white to be too dripping wet, but you don't want it to be too thick. If it's dripping wet, you're going to get a bunch of big raindrops all over your sky, and you're going to get upset because it messed the whole sky up. If it's too thick, it's going to just splatter a bunch of thick pieces of paint, and it's not going to look very much like stars. So you want to get the right consistency of wet and thick with that, and the only way you can get that is to really kind of practice the consistency off on the side until you're happy with it. And then you want to splatter it into the sky, as many stars as you want. We will do another sort of a layer of white later on in the painting to represent the sparks coming from the fire, but for now this is just the stars. I also did some shooting stars in this painting, and I'm using a number 4 round brush for this. To do the shooting stars, just paint a dot with your round brush, wipe the paint off with paper towel, and when you wipe the paint off, it becomes dry. To do the tail, you kind of press with the brush, and since the brush has dried paint on it because it's been wiped off, your tail will become sort of translucent and fade away as you stroke the tail. So I did 2 shooting stars for that. Next, we're going to paint the ground area, and the entire ground area is super easy because it's a solid black. We're going to go back to our 3/4 flat brush, and we're also going to use the color Mars Black. So everything from the bottom of the curve to the very bottom of the canvas is going to be solid black. And I started this by doing curved strokes. It actually really doesn't matter because the strokes of this black really don't show up, especially since it's a very opaque color. But I started my strokes going curved, and then by the time I got to the bottom, I pretty much did it left and right. But again, you want to make sure that your lines are going all the way across the canvas, not stopping in the middle, so that you're covering all of the white canvas, but also you're not having any strokes showing through. And then don't forget to paint the sides of the canvas. In this painting, I forgot to do the lighter part of the sides, so I did the black part and the dark blue part, but I forgot to do the light blue part. I'll do that. I did that later on after I finished the painting. Okay, so we have our sky and our ground, and we are going to do the trees next. For the trees, it says use a 12 bright and or a 4 round. I actually did it with both just to see which would be more better, and it's actually a preference thing, so I'm going to show you how to do it with the bright brush first. This is a 12 bright. It's a flat brush. There's numerous ways you can do trees. You can also do this with a fan brush. If you like doing the silhouette trees with a fan brush, you can do it that. I haven't been really using the fan brush lately, so this is the bright brush. So you start at the top and make sort of the tip of the tree. And when you're doing the strokes, you're stroking downwards and out to form the shape of the tree. So if you think of the tree as kind of a narrow triangle, so it's narrow at the top and it gets wider at the bottom, I'm using just the tip of the brush, and again stroking downwards and just forming the shape of the tree. And you can see the texture on the sides of the tree as you're stroking outwards. And then when you get towards the bottom, the strokes on the outside, they're starting to be more horizontal instead of angular. And when you get to the bottom, it's super easy because then it just blends into the ground and you don't really have to worry about all the details at the bottom with the trunk and everything. So there's my first tree with the flat brush. And I created an entire blog post about different ways you can paint trees with different kinds of brushes. So if you look in the tutorial for this post, there's a link to it and it shows you different techniques. There's a really good video on that shows you in detail different ways you can do this. There's also one about painting silhouette trees with a fan brush, so you can look into that. But I'm doing the bright brush technique with this, and it's just simply starting at the top and stroking outwards to form the shape of the tree. Some people tell me that it's easy to draw it with the chalk first, so you kind of get a basis of, okay, so this is the shape of the tree with the chalk, and I'm just going to fill it in with the chalk. So if the chalk helps, you can draw the tree first with the chalk and then fill it in, and chalk will erase. And I know the angle of this camera is not really feasible because my hand is covering it, but I'm trying my best to describe what I'm doing here. Starting at the top, this tree is taller than the other one, so to create the more natural look of the tree line, you want some trees that are taller, some are shorter, some are wider, some are thinner. This one, so I'm doing the outline of it first, and this kind of worked because now I can see, okay, here's my shape of the tree, and now I can just fill it in by stroking downwards. And I don't really have to worry about the texture of this because it's solid black. Okay, and then I'm going to also show you how to do the trees with the round brush. I found that painting the smaller trees was easy to do with the round brush, so I'll show you that in a second. I just made the top of my tree a little bit more narrow. Okay, so we have 3 trees, and I'm going to do it with the round brush now. So load your brush in the water, kind of swirl it around. With the black paint, I find that black gets kind of really thick easily, so if you add just a bit of water in that, so it's kind of an ink consistency, it's easier to work with. So the round brush is kind of similar. You start at the top, stroking downwards, but the round brush allows you to get more of a point to the tips of your tree branches. So when you stroke down and outwards, you form the triangular shape of the tree. Okay, so I'm just going to continue to do what I'm doing. I think I'm going to go silent here unless I have any extra tips to tell you. But I'm going to speed up the video just a little bit as I finish my tree line. You can do as many trees as you want. Just try to get them to be a variety of heights and sizes. There's room for one more little tree over here on the left, so I'm going to do that with my round brush and fill in that. Okay, so I'm going to show you something else you can do with these trees, and that is adding a little bit of texture, highlighting to them. We want to make a gray on our palette. It needs to be a gray that's about 2 shades darker than that black. If it's too light, it's going to look like there's snow on the trees. If it's too dark, we're not going to really notice what it's doing. So this dark gray is going to add some texture and highlight to the trees. And if you don't like this effect, you don't have to do it. I mean, it's your painting. If there's anything that I do that you don't like, you don't have to do that. But start at the bottom, and you're doing the same stroking down thing. By the way, I'm doing this with a round brush. So you're doing the same stroking down thing, and you stroke down starting from the bottom up, and each row will overlap the previous row. So it's going to make your tree look like it has some dimension and shadow to it. And I'm going to do this to all of my trees. With the bigger trees, my strokes are bigger. To make the bigger strokes, you just press harder. With my smaller trees, my strokes are not that big. They're kind of smaller. And again, working from the bottom up, you do need to make sure your gray is not super light, because if it's looking like your tree's got snow on it, your gray might be a little too light. Just a dark gray, and it just like I said, it adds a subtle look of that the tree has a little bit of dimension. Maybe some light is hitting the trees way in the background. Okay, and if you decide that you don't like how this looks, just paint it back over with black. It's not going to make a super big difference in the overall look of your painting if you don't do the shadow thing. Okay, so there are my trees way in the distance, and pretty much what we need to do is we need to wait for this to dry, because we're going to do some transferring of the fire. Now, I did mention that you can do a couple things. I mentioned in my blog post, actually. If you wanted to draw your fire free-handed, that is perfectly fine. Use a piece of chalk to draw it, or even, I'm not sure if a white color pencil would erase, probably not, but some kind of thin piece of chalk or white graphite pencil or something, so that it shows up. I guess chalk would be the best option because it erases so easily. But if you're using my traceable, like I'm demonstrating here, I used a sheet of white graphite transfer paper. I understand you may not have it available. I did see some on Amazon. I listed a link to it on Amazon, but if that's not something that you can get right away, you can get chalk and you can rub white chalk on the back of the traceable and do the exact same thing. It'll transfer when when the pressure of the pencil hits the traceable. You can try it with a white crayon. You can try it with a white color pencil, rubbing it on the back of the traceable, and it should work the same way. You could try it with the gray transfer paper. Just press really hard. It may not be as visible, but it may be visible enough to where you can see it, and then go back and outline it with the chalk. So there's a lot of options here. This fire is actually a really simple drawing, so if I recommend maybe just trying it out. There's a bunch of just simple shapes, and so you can do that. And the moon as well. I did the moon. So the placement of this traceable is actually in the lower left, so the corners of the paper actually lines up to the entire canvas, because when you print it out, it should be 2 sheets fitting together, relatively the size of 11 by 14. And then so my transfer paper actually is not that size, so I had to move it to the side to get the second half of that. But this is my drawing, so you can see what the white graphite transfer paper does. It's really nice for these dark paintings, but like I said, there's other alternatives you can do with this as well. So we have the drawing set. And the first thing we're going to do is that moon, and with titanium white and a round brush. So I'm just going to paint that moon in. Super easy, but I'm also going to do a little extra thing to it when I'm done. So paint it in a nice solid color white. The tip of the moon might be a little tricky, so you want to use just the point of your brush. If you have one of those really tiny round brushes, that might be helpful for that step, just to make sure the tips of your crescent moon are nice and sharp. I wanted to play around with this moon a little bit, so I took my finger and I kind of smeared the inner edge of it just with the tip of my finger, and it's going to create that look that the crescent moon sort of makes in the sky, where maybe there's like a cloud over it and it kind of blends, gives it that sort of whimsical effect. I smeared it too much over here on the bottom. That's why I'm taking my phthalo blue and going over it again so that I have that nice tip right there. So that's what I'm doing with that phthalo blue, fixing the tip right there. But when you use your finger to kind of smear it, just the inner edge, it creates that sort of gradient look on the inner edge of the moon. Optional, I did it just to give it a more advanced effect than just the solid crescent moon. If you don't want to do that, like I said, you don't have to. It's not going to make the painting look horrible if you don't do that to the moon. Okay, for the fire, we're going to white it out first. That means that since orange and red are such a see-through color, it's going to look too see-through and not as bright. So we want to make this shape of the fire solid white. I'm using a 12 bright brush and I'm painting the entire flame solid white. I realize I'm going to lose the drawing on the inside, all the lines on the inside of it, and that's okay. The direction of my strokes are kind of contouring the shape of the flame, so it's going curved. Using the tip of my brush on its side gets me that thinner stroke, and then I get my thicker stroke by using the full width of the stroke. Essentially, I'm just painting in my flame solid white. It doesn't need to be 100% solid opaque. In fact, it's better if it's not. It's better if there's still a little bit of sky showing through. That's okay. Just get one layer of paint on there. And since we have the white ready to go, I'm going to switch to my round brush and I'm going to paint these marshmallows in. So we have the main part of the marshmallow, just fill in the shape. But the top oval part is actually a gray. So I mixed black and white together, probably about equal amounts, to make sort of a medium gray, a lighter gray than those trees that we did. But just so it gives it the look that there's the 3D part of the marshmallow. And I know my hand is covering this one right here, but I did the side of the marshmallow, and then I'm doing the bottom oval part with gray. Okay, so super easy. And so we have our marshmallows ready to go. The white part of the fire, that needs to dry before we can actually make it look like fire. But we are going to go ahead and do the tree stumps. So this is burnt umber, and I'm going to mix titanium white with the burnt umber, so about equal amounts, and it's going to create this lighter brown. And I'm going to paint the sticks of our marshmallow. So just paint the line that you drew to create the sticks and the branches, and don't forget the little tip that's hanging out at the end of that marshmallow. So you're using a round brush. You want to make sure that the points of those sticks are nice and thin. Hold your brush very lightly to get that point, to get that tip right there on the tip of the round brush, so that your line is nice and thin. So it can go thick, and then but it goes to a very thin point at the very tip of the branch. So much like we're painting branches of a tree, it's kind of the same concept. But the reason why we mixed that white with the brown is so that it would show up against the black. Because if we just did brown with no white, it'd be too dark. It wouldn't see it very well. Okay, so I'm going to do the logs of the fire next, and I use that same brown and white combo so that it's the same shade of brown as the sticks of the marshmallow. I'm just going to paint the oval on all of those logs of the fire. So each one is going to be painted in that same color. I'm going to talk a little bit about color variation here after I do this step here. But the long part of the log is going to be a darker brown. So I'm dipping my brush in just the burnt umber and not the light brown that I created, and I'm painting the longer part of the log. I'm doing strokes that are going in the direction that the log is going. So this horizontal log, it's going left and right. And the diagonal logs, the direction of the strokes is going diagonal, and so on and so forth. So color variation, that's what I was going to mention, is there's still some light brown on my brush because I didn't rinse it off. It's possible, and actually it's a good thing if that light brown is kind of showing through in the colors. It's kind of mixing on the canvas, so it's creating some color variation, and that's going to help with our texture. If that's not happening for you, that's okay. We're going to do some texture on purpose in a little bit, but if you notice the sticks of the marshmallow, you can see some color variation there because the colors weren't mixed all the way on the palette, so it created some darker and lighter areas of the sticks of the marshmallow. So that's something that you can keep in mind when you go reload the brush. You can dip in various amounts of the light brown and the dark brown to create that color variation. But like I said, we're going to do some on purpose here in a little bit. Okay, so we have the base of our logs here, and we're going to go ahead and create a little bit of texture on our logs. So I want to make that light brown again, so mixing white and burnt umber together. And I'm going to add that lighter color in there by painting just lines. I don't want to cover all that dark brown and turn it into light brown. I'm just painting lines on the log, and you can see what's happening. That lighter color is mixing with the darker color, and I'm creating some texture on purpose now with that lighter color. And just painting lines here and there. Make sure that it's going in the direction of the log itself, and you can see what's happening. If that's not happening for you, it's possible that your brown that you painted is already too saturated and too wet. Let it dry a little bit and then come back and try it again. Then the circle part of the log, I actually added more white to my brush, and I'm attempting to make sort of a spiral on here, but my oval part of my log is still too wet, so it's not really making much of a difference right now. Later on in this painting, I went back and I added more spiral that does show up, but just taking the white and starting from the middle of the oval and just kind of spiraling out with it. And if anything, it just added some more color variation to that circle part of the log. In fact, I didn't even include this step here in my directions because when I did this, it didn't really do much. Okay, and I'm just kind of defining it a little bit more with my brown. At this point, the paint is too saturated to do really anything else to it. So what I did was, whatever paint is left on my brush, I'm just kind of gently brushing it on the ground to create some marks on the ground, as if the fire is sort of lighting the ground a little bit. We can see a little bit of light on the ground. So just a few horizontal strokes. There's not a lot of paint on my brush. If there's a lot of paint on your brush, kind of wipe it off. That'll create the dry brush effect that we want on the ground. We don't want it to be solid. We don't want to paint the ground brown. We just want a few strokes of this lighter brown color. Okay, by now your white on your fire should be dry. If it's not dry all the way, you'll need to get it to be dry. Or if it's just a tiny bit wet, it might still be okay. I'm going to load my palette in primary yellow and cad red medium hue. Okay, so red and yellow, and I didn't load it with orange because red and yellow will create orange in this fire. I'll also be using my 12 bright brush, so that's smaller flat brush. And so when we look at I guess most fires, the color is lighter at the bottom and I guess more reddish orange at the top. So that's what we're going to attempt to do here. So I'm going to start with my yellow, and I'm going to start by painting the bottom. Contouring strokes are very important in this fire because we want our strokes to go in the direction of the flame to make it actually look like a flame. So I'm going to take this yellow and I'm going to paint the bottom, curving my strokes with the shape of the flame. So if the flame is going curved, your paintbrush is going to go curved in that direction. So I'm going to continue to work my way up with this flame. I'll tell you that half this flame is going to be yellow, so the entire bottom half is actually going to be yellow. But you just want to really pay attention to the direction of your strokes here. The bright brush is really nice because you can turn it on its side to create that thinner stroke that's closer to the edge, and use the full width of it to create the thicker stroke in the middle. Wipe off that brush, grab the red. So we have yellow and red, and we want to transition this so that it blends and makes an orange in the middle. So I'm going to paint the top half of my flame red, but I'm also going to blend the middle part so that it turns orange. And you want to do this very gently and carefully. That red is kind of overpowering. If your yellow dried super fast, you may have to go back and add some more yellow to get it to blend to orange. But you can see what's happening. I'm gently blending the red wet on the canvas, and it's turning to orange. So see, I grabbed some more yellow in there just to get it to forcefully turn the orange, because that red is kind of super strong. So when we make orange, you really need more yellow than red to make orange, because red is so powerful. So that's what I'm doing here, and there's a little bit of yellow at the top as well. So I'm just kind of playing around with that idea of doing some color variation, meaning the colors are not the same everywhere, they're blending on the canvas. Okay, so the top part is supposed to be more red than yellow, and then the middle part blends to orange, and the bottom part is yellow, and of course with some color variation. So there's some streaks of yellow at the top, there's a little bit of streaks of sort of darker red at the bottom, but essentially it goes from yellow to red, yellow to orange to red. Okay, and then don't forget about these sort of stray flames that are going off on the side. And to get those thinner strokes, make sure you turn your brush on the side. And it's okay if your stroke got outside the lines. In fact, it kind of makes it look cool, because the part that's not been painted white underneath it, you get that translucent effect. So it looks like, okay, that's a real flame, because you can see that that's solid in the middle and sort of translucent on the side, because I went outside the lines a little bit on purpose, because I thought that was a cool effect. Red and yellow are such a translucent color, so they'll be see-through. You can see the blue underneath, except for the part where you painted over it with white. So I'm going back in here, adding sort of another layer in there, getting it to really blend to that orange. And there's my base of the fire. Just going to add a few strokes of that darker color in there. I don't want to lose that bright yellow color on the bottom. I know my hand's covering that there a little bit. Okay. So can't really do much else to this flame because it's all saturated. I will go back and add another layer in there, but for now I'm going to go back to my log and do some more details on my log. I'm going to grab a tiny detail brush. I actually love this detail brush. It's a 10-0 round. I found it on Amazon. There is a link to this brush of where I bought it from. But these are really nice brushes because you can get some super details with it. Again, this is just a 10-0 round pointer brush. I'm using Mars Black, and I'm doing that spiral that I wanted to do earlier with the white but didn't show up. So I'm taking that black and I'm just doing a spiral on the oval part of the log. So I'm going to do that same black spiral on each of those oval parts with the black. You can add a little bit of water to your black to get it to flow better. So there are my spirals. And then I took this a step further, wiped off the black off my brush and added white to it. And so this white adds a really cool effect because it really highlights that log. So I took it and I did a highlight on the curved part. I added white to some of the texture lines on the log. You can see that really cool effect that it's creating. Again, because this is such a thin brush, you can really get in there and add those very tiny lines, but those white lines make such a nice difference on those logs. And then I really liked how that looked, so I went ahead and added the white on the branches of our marshmallow branches there, and so that highlight really makes it look like that fire is giving some very strong highlights to those sticks and logs. I even tried to see what it would do with the marshmallow. It didn't really make much of a difference with that, but I added just a tiny white highlight on that marshmallow as well. Now my fire is a little bit more dry, and I'm going to go in and just kind of add some more detail. If you remember my traceable drawing, there's some more lines on the inside of the fire. I can't see those lines anymore, so I'm just kind of make it up in my head here what that line looks like. But I'm going to add another layer of this fire. I mixed yellow and white together to make a very light yellow so that it will stand out. So I'm just going in here and adding another flame in here to make it look like there's another layer of bright flame in this fire. With the round brush, it is a little bit wet, so it's kind of mixing with that reddish orange, but it's still creating an interesting effect. So this is yellow and white. I'm just painting another small flame inside of the big flame, just kind of improvising that shape. If you're not really comfortable with doing that, you can always go and draw your shape first and then fill it in. Or you can get your traceable, you can retrace that flame shape, and then you can go back and fill it in as well. But the point is that this bottom part of the fire needs to be super bright so that white and yellow combo create a nice effect there on the bottom. So really I'm just kind of playing around with this flame texture here, adding more yellow and white towards the bottom, and making sure my round brush is just really contouring that shape of the fire and just sort of rendering it. You don't have to continue to render it realistic. Just keep adding the colors to it until you feel happy with it. I wanted to go back in there and add some more color variation in this flame up here because I thought the red was a little bit too solid right here. So I mixed red and yellow on my palette, and essentially I'm just grabbing different amounts of red and yellow on my palette to create some color variation with the round brush, contouring with the shape of the flame so the colors sort of blend. Maybe we have a streak of yellow at the top, maybe a streak of reddish orange towards the middle, or maybe some smaller streaks of smaller flames coming up, just so it's not solid color at the top. And just kind of having fun with it and playing around, just trying to keep the rule of having it be darker at the top and brighter in the bottom of the flame, and maybe some more going up there. When you are done and satisfied with your flame, we're going to do one final touch on this painting. And this was actually my favorite part because it's that one little thing that you could do to your painting that just makes it so magical. But the sparks that are flying at the top of the flame, same effect with the stars, but I'm purposely making it look like it's right there at the flame. So this is the toothbrush in the white. Make sure your consistency is just right to get your nice splatter, and add that right at the top of the flame to create that nice little sparkle at the top. That is the final step in this painting. That's it. I really enjoyed this one. I hope that you did too. It brings back lots of memories of roasting marshmallows by the campfire, camping, and all that fun summer goodness. Thank you for watching this painting tutorial.